About 10 years ago, my cousin and I were on a train from Warsaw to Krakow, Poland. We shared a compartment with a Catholic priest. And this isn't a surprise. There are a lot of Catholics in Poland. And in fact, 80% of Catholics are in church on Sunday in Poland. Anyway, Father Victor was traveling with his sister to a family wedding. He was warm and funny. I remember his cell phone ring was the theme from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It was just so great for a priest, I thought. He was so interested in us and full of questions. He told us about places to go, where to buy amber, Krakow being the epicenter of amber jewelry, and how to avoid paying too much. When we arrived, he asked us how we would get to our hotel, and we said we'd take a taxi. He said, oh no. He said, no, I have a driver coming, and we will take you. You'll come with me. We'll drop you off on the way. Then he turned to his sister and said, do you mind taking a taxi? And she said, oh no, it's my pleasure, it's my pleasure. She said to us, I'll see my brother in a few minutes. So when we got off the train, Father Victor asked several bystanders to help us with our bags. Like, you, come over here, help them with their bags. And this being a place where priests are revered, we all were like, oh yes, Father, yes, help us with our bags. And after his driver dropped us off, we thanked him profusely. And he said, you are in Poland. We are Christians here. And here it is our privilege to greet everyone as Christ. I haven't forgotten Father Victor. He was the person I thought of when I remembered a phrase of one of my mentors and dear friends, John Scannell. It's something he says frequently: never resist a generous impulse. Never resist a generous impulse. I'm so glad that Father Victor yielded to his generous impulse. We were surely blessed by him. Our God is a generous God, a God of blessing, of provision and abundance and of great love. Most generous of all is the gift of God in Jesus, who poured out his love for us even to the cross. Because of this grace given to us, this generous impulse acted upon in the extraordinary incarnation of Jesus, we are blessed, and we are to be a blessing to others. The foundation of generosity is that what we give is of God. So we say, all things come of thee, O Lord, and of thine own have we given. A generous impulse reminds us of God's love for us. Now, generosity is not about the pocketbook, the size of the gift. It is about the heart. And the opposite of generosity is fear. We may experience it as caution or common sense, but it comes from self-protectiveness, a fear of what might happen. Generosity requires an open heart and a risk, for there is no guarantee that we will receive anything in return. Yet when we step forward generously in Christ with open hearts, we receive unexpected gifts and blessings, and our own hearts are expanded. In a recent vestry meeting, Aaron, our senior warden, was talking about how we interact as a church with people who approach us about using our facilities. Now, we've been talking about how our vision for expansion is based on the fact that our facilities have some limitations. So you can see why sometimes when people ask us to use our church, we may think the first of the reasons why it won't work, why things will be messy or complicated or chaotic. Even if well-intended, we may not lead with a generous impulse. Aaron was calling us to do better. Let's start with yes, he said, and then go from there. When a generous impulse is our organizing principle, we are not rejecting all limits. But what a difference when someone encounters us first as people seeking to be generous. Even if we cannot accommodate them, we have shown them our hearts. And a generous impulse opens our minds to inventiveness and possibilities. We think, let's at least try to make this work. So it's worth the effort, for who knows, we may be entertaining angels unaware. The story of Ruth and Naomi is about a chain of generosity. Ruth is a Moabite, a foreigner. She had married Elimelech, the Israelite son of Naomi. Ruth was among the lucky. Her mother-in-law loved her, and she loved her mother-in-law. And they were both dependent on Elimelech for protection. But Elimelech has died. And so, as a widow and a foreigner, Ruth is vulnerable, and Naomi is vulnerable twice over. She has already lost her husband, and now her son. Who will provide for her? Who will provide for Ruth? But she generously encourages Ruth to go back to her family for her own sake. She doesn't want to be a burden to her. But Ruth has a generous heart and has pledged herself to her mother-in-law. And so in return, Naomi has been thinking of a solution, and she sees an opportunity in the open-hearted Boaz, which is where the story picks up today. And although we didn't hear about it in today's lesson, elsewhere in the story we learned that Ruth's generosity had reached Boaz's ears and impressed him. It inspired his own generosity. And so he and Ruth came together and formed a family. And one of the unexpected blessings of that family was Obed, the father of Jesse, the father of David, and the ancestor of Jesus. So one of the ways we can understand the story of Ruth is that one generous heart bestows blessings on others. And those blessings flow back to us and to others in new and unexpected ways. I've been thinking about the generous impulse our Statue of Liberty represents. It is rooting us in a start with yes impulse. Promise is not that any who wish may make their home here, but it is to say that since so many of us have been blessed by the generosity of that idea, we continue to carry that ideal in our hearts. We are made in the image of God. In humility, we confess that many of our ancestors who made their homes here were no better or worse than those who seek to come here today. We carry the memory that we all came on some ship looking for safe harbor, through some port of entry where we might have been denied, or in some caravan because we feared for our very lives. And perhaps along the way, we met generous strangers. I've been moved by reading stories of those encountering asylum seekers on their way. In Mexico, a mother feeds migrants lemon tea and stew, using meat from her son's butcher shop. Her daughter is handing out fruit. My family has been very blessed, the woman said, and we know that we are all brothers. What God gives us, we should share. Now, it is not ungenerous to have policies to protect our borders and screen those who seek to enter here. It is not ungenerous to deny entry and even deport people who come here illegally, especially those who bring harm. But the impulse to dehumanize those who come, disparaging their countries, labeling them vermin, painting a picture of them as disease-infested, dangerous criminals. As a starting point, that is decidedly ungenerous. Until recently, the immigration discussion has been characterized by people on both sides, starting with the generous impulse. And generosity does not dictate a particular solution to this very complicated issue, which has been oversimplified by everyone. It's just to say that we start with open hearts, and then we discern what is the most we can reasonably do. As much about the widow, our gospel today points to the miserliness of the scribes, who claim to give their lives to God, but lack generosity of spirit. Jesus wants us to know that God is watching them, and that these ostentatious givers were takers. For all their show of piety, they devoured widows' houses, he says. Their giving was motivated by status. The widow's giving dignified her. Even in her poverty, she still asserted her membership amongst the people of Israel. She gave open-heartedly and unafraid all she had to live on. Perhaps Jesus saw her gift as foreshadowing his own giving with his all for us. When we are generous, we are acting as image bearers. The greatest impulse to come, gifts to give, comes from our kinship to others, our fellow creatures of God. How differently I felt knowing that there had been an earthquake in Puebla, Mexico, after I had been there just a few months earlier. My impulse to be generous came from the communion I felt with the people there. I wouldn't have had that impulse if I hadn't been there. And I knew that my gifts were being used by them to offer generous help to each other. That is what the generous impulse begets. I went to a conference a few years ago where a speaker told about taking up a generosity challenge. He pledged that for 30 days he would say yes to everyone who asked. Every beggar, street musician, or nonprofit who solicited him would at least get something. Now you and I might not be able to take up the letter of that challenge, but stay with me. Because this man ran a very large nonprofit that invested in ventures all over the world that were trying to solve social problems. He had lots of money to give. The very premise of his philanthropic fund, which was called the Acumen Fund, was generous. But the man had begun questioning his own heart. He said, pretty soon, no becomes who you are. I needed a new habit and a new reflex. When I teach my kids to say please and thank you, it takes repetition. I wanted to practice being more generous. I started to understand generosity in a new way, and I started to be more effective because I learned that even being a philanthropist, I had to remember to start with yes. As a venture capitalist, he had to say no a lot. But he remembered to at least start with the hope and the idea of saying yes. So never resist a generous impulse. Stand in the gifts you receive from God and take the risk to pay them forward. God provokes us with opportunities to be generous because God is provoking us toward the unexpected insights, the fresh delights, the blessings that come from these unexpected sources. And I leave you now with some of the words of a poem by Wendell Berry. No, there is no going back. Now more than ever, you can be generous toward each day that comes young to disappear forever and yet remain unaging in the mind. Every day, you have less reason not to give yourself away. Amen.